Hello, good beans, and welcome back to Midnight Requiem. Today we'll be talking about violent end to Bonnie and Clyde's life of crime. Now, Hollywood is notorious for simplifying and glorifying stories about outlaws. Think of the 1969 film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, and the movie Bonnie and Clyde is part of that tradition. This 1967 film, starring the handsome duo of Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, portrayed Bonnie and Clyde as reckless and daring, madly in love with a devil-may-care approach to life and crime. The reality is far less glamorous. Clyde Chestnut Barrow, 1909 to 1934, was a cold-blooded killer. He and his gang murdered at least 9 law officers and several civilians during a 2-year crime career that included several highly publicized bank robberies, but more often targeted small stores and gas stations, and several of the gang's victims were store personnel and gas station attendants. While Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, 1910 to 1934, probably never killed anyone, she was an accomplice to many of the crimes and some of the killings. Bonnie was 23 and Clyde was 25 when they were ambushed by a posse on rural Louisiana State Highway 154th at 9:15 on the morning of 23 May 1934. The posse pumped approximately 130 bullets into the stolen car at Clyde, the driver, and Bonnie, the passenger. Even after the car crashed into the embankment, the lawmen continued firing into the car, not willing to take any chances. The coroner's report said Clyde was hit 17 times and Bonnie 26. 2 weeks before she was killed, Bonnie visited her mother for the last time and handed her a poem she wrote. Bonnie had been a gifted student and a writer in high school, entitled The Trail's End. It concludes with these haunting lines. They don't think they're too smart or desperate. They know that the law always wins. They've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that death is the wages of sin. Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief. But it's death for Bonnie and Clyde. They certainly did go down together, but they were not buried side by side. Bonnie's family would not allow it. The following 4 newspaper articles give a less glamorous portrayal of the two outlaws than the 1967 film presented. The first is a news account of their gory end. The second recounts Clyde's many killings. The third gives the reaction of Bonnie's estranged husband. And the fourth is an editorial from a Dallas paper where Clyde's crime career started with a booking in 1926 when the 16-year-old was arrested for not returning a rental car on time. Here's a transcript of this article. Barrow and Bonnie Parker shot dead from ambush, riddled by Texas officers. Public enemy fails to halt speeding automobile. Car wrecked. Bodies inside. Arcadia, LA, May 23rd. AP Clyde Barrow and his gunwoman companion Bonnie Parker were beaten to the trigger pulled by Texas and Louisiana officers today. Their crime career ended in a blaze of riot gunfire when, disregarding a command to halt and unable to get their weapons into play, Desperado and his cigar-smoking girl crumpled up in the front seat of a car traveling about 85 miles an hour. The car careened into an embankment and was wrecked. In the wreckage, the officers who had set the trap of the Southwest Public Enemy No. 1 and Parker woman found both bodies riddled with bullets. Bonnie's was almost doubled over the machine gun she had held in her lap. Barrow's broken body was twisted behind the steering wheel and a revolver gripped in one hand. The car, splintered by gunfire, proved to be a speeding arsenal. The trap was sprung by Frank Hammer, a former Texas Ranger, B.M. Gollett, a highway patrolman, and Ted Hinton and Bob Alcorn, Dallas County Sheriffs. Hammer was recently commissioned as a highway patrolman for the special purpose of getting his man, and in this case his gunwoman. Hammer had learned of the highways frequented by the pair and had been watching for weeks. Hammer and Galt had been watching the Black Lake hideout for 2 months. Barely missed them. Several weeks ago, they barely missed the couple at the rendezvous. After that, they adopted a policy of sitting and waiting. The bandits' trail was picked up today by Hammer and 3 Texas Rangers associates in Rozier Parish, where Barrow was reported to have relatives. They followed the bandit car to Benville Parish, where the Rangers were joined by Sheriff Henderson Jordan and a staff of deputies. The officers got ahead of the bandit car, and they lay in wait until Barrow ran his machine into the ambush. With the posse heavily armed, hiding in the brush along the paved highway, Barrow's car broke over the horizon, racing at 85 miles an hour. As it approached, an officer yelled, "Halt!" Barrow and the woman answered by reaching for their guns. They were met by a fusillade from a dozen weapons. The automobile smashed into an embankment. The officers continued to fire until the bodies were riddled. Barrow and his companion had led peace officers on the wild chase over half a dozen states. Frequently, they were cornered, but either eluded their pursuers or shot it out. They replenished their funds by robbing banks and businesses, houses. Reports that 3 other bandit companions of Barrow and Parker women had been slain were denied by officers on the scene, ready to shoot instantly. Barrow was regarded as one of the nation's most dangerous killers, shooting at the bat of an eye and fleeing in fast automobiles. Bonnie Parker was charged with participation in most of Barrow's later crimes. Officers said she was as quick on the trigger as her associate and just as elusive. The bodies are being taken to Arcadia, LA, 17 miles east of the scene of the killings. In the wrecked car, officers found 3 Army rifles, 2 sawed-off automatic shotguns, a machine gun, and a dozen pistols and large quantities of ammunition. Hammer's laconic report read, "We killed Clyde, Barrow, and Bonnie at 9:15 this morning. They were at Black Lake, a hideout we had been watching for weeks. Clyde and Bonnie did not get to fire a shot. Their car was full of guns and ammunition, but they did not get a chance to use them." Here's the background of Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie was just shy of 5 feet tall, all of 100 pounds, a part-time waitress and an amateur poet from a poor Dallas home who was bored with life and wanted something more. Clyde was a fast-talking, small-time thief from a similarly destitute Dallas family who hated poverty and wanted to make a name for himself. Together they became the most notorious crime couple in American history, Bonnie and Clyde. Barrow was suspected of numerous killings and was wanted for murder, robbery, and state charges of kidnapping. The FBI, then called the Bureau of Investigations, became interested in Barrow and his paramour late in December 1932 through a singular bit of evidence. A Ford automobile which had been stolen in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, was found abandoned near Jackson, Michigan in September of that year. In Oklahoma, it was learned that another Ford car had been abandoned there, which had been stolen in Illinois. A search for this car revealed it had been occupied by a man and a woman, indicated by abandoned articles therein. In this car was found a prescription bottle, which led special agents to a drugstore in Texas, where investigation disclosed the woman for whom the prescription had been filled was Clyde Barrow's aunt. Further investigation revealed that the woman who obtained the prescription had been visited recently by Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, and Clyde's brother, L.C. Barrow. It also was learned that these 3 were driving a Ford car identified as the one stolen in Illinois. It was further shown that L.C. Barrow had secured the empty prescription bottle from a son of the woman who had originally obtained it. On May 20th, 1933, the United States Commissioner at Dallas, Texas, issued a warrant against Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker, charging them with an interstate transportation from Dallas to Oklahoma. On the automobile stolen in Illinois, the FBI then started its hunt for their elusive pair. Early in the years, Bonnie and Clyde met in Texas in January 1930. At the time, Bonnie was 19, married to an imprisoned murderer. Clyde was 21 and unmarried. Soon after, he was arrested for burglary and sent to jail. He escaped using a gun Bonnie had smuggled to him, was recaptured, and was sent back to prison. Clyde was paroled in February 1932, rejoined Bonnie, and resumed a life of crime. In addition to the automobile theft charge, Bonnie and Clyde were suspects in other crimes at the time they were killed in 1934. They were believed to have committed 13 murders and several robberies and burglaries. Barrow, for example, was suspected of murdering 2 police officers at Joplin, Missouri, and kidnapping a man and a woman in rural Louisiana. He released them near Waldo, Texas. Numerous sightings followed linking this pair with bank robberies and automobile thefts. Clyde allegedly murdered a man at Hillsborough, Texas, committed robberies at Lufkin and Dallas, Texas, murdered 1 sheriff and wounded another at Stringtown, Oklahoma, kidnapped a deputy at Carlsbad, New Mexico, stole an automobile at Victoria, Texas, attempted to murder a deputy at Wharton, Texas, committed murder and robbery at Abilene and Sherman, Texas, committed murder at Dallas, Texas, abducted a sheriff and the chief of police at Welton, Texas, and committed murder at Joplin and Columbia, Missouri. The crime spree begins later in 1932. Bonnie and Clyde began traveling with Raymond Hamilton, a young gunman. Hamilton left them several months later and was replaced by William Daniel Jones in November. Ivan M. Buck Barrow, brother of Clyde, was released from the Texas State Prison on March 23, 1933. Having been granted a full pardon by the governor, he quickly joined Clyde, bringing his wife Blanche. So the group now numbered 5 persons. This gang embarked upon a series of bold robberies that made headlines across the country. They escaped capture in various encounters with the law. However, their activities made law enforcement efforts to apprehend them even more intense during a shootout with police in Iowa on July 29, 1933. Buck Barrow was fatally wounded and Blanche was captured. Jones, who was frequently mistaken for Pretty Boy Floyd, was captured in November 1933 in Houston, Texas by the sheriff's office. Bonnie and Clyde went on together. On November 22, 1933, a trap was set by the Dallas, Texas sheriff and his deputies in an attempt to capture Bonnie and Clyde near Grand Prairie, Texas. But the couple escaped the officers' gunfire. They held up an attorney on the highway and took his car, which they abandoned in Miami, Oklahoma on December 21, 1933. Bonnie and Clyde held up and robbed a citizen in Louisiana. On January 16, 1934, 5 prisoners, including Raymond Hamilton, who was serving sentences totaling more than 200 years, were liberated from the Eastham State Prison farm at Waldo, Texas, by Clyde Barrow, accompanied by Bonnie Parker. 2 guards were shot by the escaping prisoners with automatic pistols, which had been previously concealed in a ditch by Barrow. As the prisoners ran, Barrow covered their retreat with bursts of machine gun fire. Among the escapees was Henry Methvin of Louisiana. Now, the last months, on April 1st, 1934, Bonnie and Clyde encountered 2 young highway patrolmen near Grapevine, Texas, before the officers could draw their guns. They were shot on April 6, 1934. A constable at Miami, Oklahoma, fell mortally wounded by Bonnie and Clyde, who also abducted a police chief whom they wounded. The FBI had jurisdiction solely on the charge of transporting a stolen automobile. Although the activities of the Bureau agents were vigorous and ceaseless, every clue was followed. Wanted notices, furnishing fingerprints, photograph, description, criminal record, and other data were distributed to all officers. The agents followed the trail through many states and into various haunts of the Barrow Gang, particularly Louisiana. The association with Henry Methvin and the Methvin family was discovered by FBI agents, and they found that Bonnie and Clyde had been driving a car stolen in New Orleans. On April 13, 1934, an FBI agent, through investigation in the vicinity of Houston, Louisiana, obtained information which definitely placed Bonnie and Clyde in a remote section southwest of that community. The home of Methvin's was not far away, and the agent learned of visits there by Bonnie and Clyde. Special agents in Texas had learned that Clyde and his companion had been traveling from Texas to Louisiana, sometimes accompanied by Henry Methvin. The FBI and local law enforcement authorities in Louisiana and Texas concentrated on apprehending Bonnie and Clyde, whom they strongly believed to be in the area. It was learned that Bonnie and Clyde, with some of the Methvins, had staged a party at Black Lake, Louisiana on the night on May 21st, 1934, and were due to return to the area 2 days later. Before dawn on May 23, 1934, a posse composed of police officers from Louisiana and in Texas, including Texas Ranger Frank Hammer, concealed themselves in bushes along the highway near Sayos, Louisiana. In the early daylight, Bonnie and Clyde appeared in an automobile, and when they attempted to drive away, the officers opened fire. Bonnie and Clyde were killed instantly. Now, here's a transcript of the second article, Clyde Barrow Blaze Trail of Murder in Southwest, by Associated Press, Dallas, Texas, Wednesday, May 23rd. Clyde Champion Barrow, the Southwest #1 public enemy, was wanted in connection with at least a dozen killings throughout the Southwest, on several which he faced formal charges of murder. His police record dates from 1926, when he was arrested in Dallas for automobile theft. In 1930, still known only as a minor hoodlum, he was sentenced to Texas Penitentiary for 14 years on burglary and theft charges. Early in 1932, he was granted a general parole by Governor Ross Sterling, shortly thereafter embarking on his spectacular career of armed robbery and terrorism. Here are some of the crimes for which Clyde Barrow, either alone or in company with his brother Marvin, killed by officers in Iowa in 1933, was wanted. April 30th, 1932, murder of J.W. Butcher, filling station operator at Hillsboro, Texas. August 5th, 1932, murder of Deputy Sheriff E.C. Moore at Atoka, Oklahoma. October 11th, 1932, killing of Howard Hall, grocery clerk at Sherman, Texas. December 25th, 1932, killing of Doyle Johnson at Temple, Texas. January 7th, 1933, killing of Deputy Sheriff Malcolm Davis in Dallas. April 13th, 1933, slaying a constable J.W. Harriman and Detective Harry McBeanies at Joplin, Missouri. June 23, 1933, killing of Marshal Henry Humphrey at Von Burn Ark. January 16, 1934, killing of Major Crowson Guard at State Prison Farm near Huntsville, Texas, when Barrow allegedly staged a raid in which Raymond Hamilton, convicted killer and bank robber, and 4 other convicts were liberated. April 1st, 1934, killing of E.B. Wheeler and H.D. Murphy, Texas, highway patrolman near Grapevine, Texas. April 6, 1934, killing of Constable Cale Campbell at Miami, Oklahoma. Bonnie Parker, Barrow's companion on many of the forsays, was charged by officers with active participation in many of the crimes. She was believed to have been with Clyde and his brother Marvin when posse cornered the gang near Dexter, Iowa, July 24th, 1933. Clyde and Bonnie eluded officers, but Marvin was fatally wounded. Photographs retrieved by officers from hideouts of the gang showed that Parker woman fondling high-powered firearms and smoking cigars to an officer whom she had Barrow kidnapped and held captive for a time. However, Bonnie denied she was addicted to tobacco in that form. The pictures had been taken as a lark, she asserted. Here is a transcription for the third article. Glad she died like she did, Roy Thornton, Bonnie's spouse, says. Houston, Texas, May 23rd, AP. Roy Thornton, 25, convict husband of Bonnie Parker, Wiley gunwoman, who was slain with Clyde Barrow near Arcadia, LA, Wednesday, said he was glad his wife died as she did. I'm glad, he said. They went out like they did. It was better than getting caught. Captain Ike Kelly, manager of the retrieved prison farm where Thornton is serving a long sentence for robbery asked Thornton if he had anything to say. "I'm no snitcher," Thornton sneered, "that's all." Thornton previously said he had not seen Bonnie since 1931 when he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. 2 months ago, Thornton was shot in an attempt to break from the Huntsville State Prison. The last article transcribes as "wages of sin." There has been no question in minds of the law-abiding that the sinister careers of Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker would end either in the death chair or at the hands of a posse. The only question was when. That had been answered now, not soon enough to have preserved useful lives and property already lost, but with the inevitable comparative speed that overtakes all of their kind. Not in the harsh Mosaic code of the Old Testament, but in the unerring philosophy of the New is found the somber reflection of Paul that the wages of sin is death. The Barrow-Parker finale cuts a notch on the gun of relentless law, this time tracking down the criminals, cornering and finishing them. The state and nation owe a debt of thanks to Sheriff Henderson Jordan of Arcadia, LA, the Dallas County law officers, and former state ranger who ably finished the job. The community owes a debt to itself and to prosperity to see to it, by injunction if need be, that no show is made of the interment of the brutal pair who have met a fate they deserved. To what throwback inhumanity or flaw in civilization the world owes its Barrows and Dillingers can only be conjectured. It is an evil outcropping whose example spreads and will spread until juries act sternly to convince the erring that property and life are sacred and punishment speedy and severe. Now, I would like to talk about one of the Texas Rangers who led the 1934 posse that tracked down and killed criminals Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Frank Hammer, renowned for his toughness, marksmanship, and investigative skill, he acquired status in the Southwest as the archetypal Texas Ranger. He also led the fight in Texas against the Ku Klux Klan, starting in 1922 as a senior captain of the Texas Rangers, and he is believed to have saved at least 15 people from lynch mobs. He was inducted into the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. His professional record and reputation are controversial, particularly with regard of his willingness to use extrajudicial killing, even in a increasingly modernized society. Hammer has been described by biographer John Bosanecker as one of the greatest American lawmen of the 20th century. As always, my good being, be loving and caring to each other. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave comments. Have a wonderful day.